The second activity under step 3 is about constructing an incinerator. This is an optional activity and should be only considered if you are sure that waste is anyway burned at the final disposal site. You will have two objectives under this activity. The first one is to increase the heat of the burning of waste. This is to reduce also toxic fumes. The second one is to reduce the space needed for the final dump site. You have two main activities. The first one is that you will construct an incinerator, and the second one is that you will teach the committee how to use the incinerator. Building an incinerator will take you, to our experience, around 2 days. It depends a little bit where you can build it. You can build it in any steel workshop or blacksmith who can work with steel and who has a welder. After you finish the construction of the incinerator, you will then move it for the final dump site and then show the committee how to operate the incinerator. Your main stakeholder for this activity is just the committee. The material you will need is on one side all the steel and a workshop where you actually can build it. The cost for incinerator, from our experience, is something between $80 to $150, depends where you can build it. And afterwards, to show the committee how to use the incinerator, you should have some waste available. For those of you who are working in rural communities, the burning of waste is probably nothing uncommon. Actually, it is more one of the common methods to treat waste. Estimates said that globally around 2 billion people do not have access to proper waste management, and therefore the burning of waste is one of their methods to finally solve the waste they generate. So the reasons why people are doing this are mainly two. One is for sure to reduce the amount of waste which is going to their local dump site. And the other one is that it is just a more, let's say, traditional habit. So organic waste was burned decades ago, always. It is a common way. So now they are just continuing this habit, and with organic waste, just more and more inorganic waste, specifically plastic, is mixing into it, but the treatment method just stays the same. Let's have a look at two different methods of open waste burning. The picture on the left side is a typical on-compound burning. It is mainly garden waste coming from leaves and branches, and a little bit of plastic waste coming from household consumption. Then, when the rainy season is finished, at least here in Myanmar, slowly they will gather all the waste in the garden and then finally burn everything. On the right-hand side, you see the local dump of a village of around 200-300 households. So they as well, they actually gather all their waste during the year, and for sure during the rainy season they are not able to burn their waste. And as soon as the rainy season is finished and the waste is drying out a little bit, then they just burn the whole dump site. And you see here the generation of black carbon smoke emitted from the dump site. The effects of black carbon emissions are quite severe. On one side, we have respiratory system diseases caused by toxic fumes like dioxin, and on the other side, we have the more general problem with air pollution. What can we do about it? We know already from the community that they decided they will burn the waste. So from our side, the only thing we can do is to reduce the emission of black carbon as much as possible. Over the years, we came up with a design which looks roughly like this. This is what we call a burn cage. It is built from common construction iron rods and basically allows the flow of air through the burn cage as good as possible. Also, you can see it has some rods in the middle of the cage to kind of build different layers inside the cage so that the heat can be better transferred. Through this design, we will not be able, sadly, to stop open burning, but at least we will be able to raise the temperature of the incineration of the waste and therefore reduce the amount of black carbon released to the air. Now, if you decide to use such an incinerator, your dump site should look as follows. First of all, it should be at least 50 meters away from any house. If it is more, it is better. Make sure that there is nothing around the incinerator which can catch fire. A few meters is actually enough. Then, below the incinerator, you will need a small hole to gather the ashes. If you know that you will need to use the incinerator on a daily basis, make the hole a little bit deeper. Then you will place the incinerator on top, and if needed, under the condition, for example, that there is a lot of rain, you can build also an iron roof on top. So after the time the ash is filling up your hole completely, you can just move your incinerator a few meters to the side, close the one hole and dig another hole on the side. Loading an incinerator is straightforward. On the bottom layer, you fill up roughly 1 feet of waste. Then you put some metal rods in between to separate the first layer from the second layer, and then just fill up until it is full. Ignite the waste from all sides. Under normal condition, this should go very quickly as the plastic is burning fast. However, here we had some trouble since it was just at the end of the rainy season and the waste was still comparably wet. The fire should spread quickly throughout the waste in the incinerator, while the bottom layer and the top layer are supporting each other in increasing this process. The full burning process will take around 5 to 10 minutes. At the end, you will have on the bottom still some fire. At that time, it could be possible to start reloading the incinerator with new waste from the top. In that way, you can keep the incinerator running continuously. To reduce the toxic fumes generated through the incineration, try to avoid these 3 kinds of materials as much as you can. First of all, PS and EPS. These are mostly coming in the form of styrofoam boxes. Then the second one, and probably most important, is PVC. Mostly you see this in these blue pipes, and it is actually not a very common waste material in rural areas because it is mostly reused. However, be aware that PVC is also often used as a wrapping material for PET bottles. So unless you are able to take out the PET bottles for recycling, there might be some PVC also burning in your incinerator. The other material which you should try to avoid is actually white paper, and because of the chlorine is forming with other plastic materials, also dioxin. So when you can avoid paper as good as you can, which is, at least in the rural areas of Myanmar, also not such a big issue. We see a number of advantages of using this kind of incinerator. The first ones are more from the environmental perspective. First, there is a complete burning of waste. The second is that there is less black carbon emissions and therefore less development of toxic fumes. The other advantages are more operational. The first one is that it needs a little amount of space only compared to a larger dump site. Then also it is a rather cheap incinerator, can be produced for around 100 to 200 US dollars. In most cases, it can be even produced directly in the village or at least in the nearby town. The last advantage also, it does not need any additional fuel. So you don't need to ask the villagers to use some of their gasoline to ignite the incinerator. It can run completely on its own fuel. Maintaining an incinerator is sadly not an easy task, and there will be a lot of challenges in the process. Still, I want to focus only on 3. The first one is related to waste segregation. So when there is a lot of organic waste, especially food waste, entering your dump site and is then burned, the burning temperature is going down. Another issue is when you have a lot of material like PVC or EPS, you will produce a lot of toxic fumes, which is also really not good. That brings me to the second challenge. So toxic fumes will be released during the burning process. So the temperature of this incineration process will be not high enough to break up the molecules purely into carbon dioxide. So whatever happens, you will always have a residue of toxic fumes which are released to air. This is sadly an unavoidable problem. The last challenge I want to focus on is rain. So in Myanmar it is raining 5 months per year. So during this time, maintaining the incineration is quite difficult. So either you need to have a roof or you need to be very much in control of your collection system so that the garbage which enters the incinerator is more or less dry. From our experience, there are few recommendations I want to give. The first one is related to rain. So when you do not have the funds to build a large roof, you can also use a piece of wood during the time where you're not burning the waste to cover the incinerator. In that way, the waste which is already inside will stay dry. The second recommendation is more an experience we had. So when the community decide to actually use an incinerator, it stimulates waste segregation closer to source. Because the incinerator is not very big, so people cannot just come there and dump their whole waste there and just burn it. So they are more selective, and that is then encouraging segregation. The last one is when you are using actually a self-dropping system. So a system where the community members need to bring their waste themselves to the dump site to burn. You should provide a decent amount of training so that everyone knows how to handle the incinerator.